Injuries in football have robbed us of some potential all-time greats. Adriano looked to be Ronaldo's heir for Brazil in the mid-2000s, when he was genuinely unstoppable, before injuries and his father's tragic death upended his career overnight. Fellow Brazilian Alexander Pato looked to have the world at his feet in Milan and for Brazil just a couple of years later, but hardcore partying and persistent injury problems destroyed what looked to be one of the most promising young players of a generation. Johan Gerkhoff was genuinely one of the best players in the world for a single season at Bordeaux, when he was touted as France's successor to Zinedine Zidane, before chronic muscle injuries following a big money move to Lyon dashed those lofty ambitions. Abou Diaby was meant to be the next Patrick Vieira at Arsenal, and he looked capable of it when fit. It was just a shame that was only for about 6 games a season. Meanwhile, teammate Jack Wilshere dominated a Barcelona team and midfield that was arguably the greatest in the history of the sport when he was only 19, before suffering a horrible ankle injury from which he never fully recovered while still in his teens. Wilshere retired from football at 30 and played his last game for England at 24. Sebastian Deisler was the golden boy of German football in the early to mid-2000s, and when Michael Ballack left Bayern for Chelsea, he was expected to step up and inherit the mantle of being his club and country's main man. Deisler had the ability to do it, but sadly, not the body. Several cruciate ligament ruptures halted Deisler's anticipated ascent to becoming one of the best players in the world, as they would for anyone, as well as sending him spiralling into a deep depression. He retired from football at the age of 27. The list goes on, but I was recently challenged, are there any current footballers of that calibre who would be world class were it not for injuries? Well, challenge accepted, and I should add that I am applying a very high bar when it comes to what constitutes world class. At a minimum, I am talking about being one of the best handful of players on the planet in their positions and, ideally, someone who would be in strong contention to make a World 11 squad of 23. William Saliba would meet that requirement, for example, but someone like Jared Bowen, brilliant as he is, probably wouldn't. Without further ado then, who did of course have a terrible time with injuries, but isn't currently an active professional footballer, and therefore can't feature, here are 7 current footballers who I genuinely believe could be world class right now had they not had such a torrid time with injuries. 7th, Paulo Dybala. It feels as though Paulo Dybala has been around forever. From a very early age with Instituto in Argentina and subsequently Palermo in Italy, Dybala was described as a wonder kid and touted for future stardom. There were several editions of Football Manager, a popular video game which used to exist, some of you will be old enough to remember it, in which signing Dybala was effectively a cheat code as he casually proceeded to become the best player on the planet. It is easy to dismiss that hype with the benefit of hindsight while watching on from afar, but those who have followed Dybala's career a little bit more closely and have witnessed him at his freakish best will feel as though that could have become a reality if his muscles hadn't have been crafted out of silly string. A classically Argentinian forward or number 10, Dybala is effortlessly inventive, he beats players with ease, and he has that little bit of fire in his belly. Unlike a lot of players who suffer from injury problems, whether that be Neymar or Eden Hazard, Dybala's work rate, dedication and commitment to training have rarely been questioned. If anything, there are those who feel as though his bullish style, defensive industry, and unwillingness to shirk a challenge may have contributed to some of the knocks and setbacks which started to blight him following his move to Juventus. In his last season at Palermo, Dybala hit double figures for both goals and assists for a newly promoted club at the age of 21. Chelsea, PSG and Juventus clamoured to sign Dybala in the summer of 2015 as perhaps the hottest young property in Europe at the time, but it was the old lady who landed the young man for a potential €40 million fee. The muscle injury started almost as soon as Dybala arrived in Turin, but he still played a lot of football in his first 3 seasons. Indeed, in his third, the 2017-18 season, you could argue that Dybala was in fact world-class, as he led Juve's scoring charts from a withdrawn role, both in Serie A and in all competitions, and was more than a little unfortunate to be overlooked for a Ballon d'Or nomination, especially after he had finished 15th in Ballon d'Or voting, ahead of Antoine Griezmann, Toni Kroos and Eden Hazard, in what was arguably a less impressive campaign the previous season. The injuries became more persistent as time wore on though, and, starting with a knee ligament injury in January 2021, also more serious. Initially expected to rule Dybala out for just 15 to 20 days, the Argentine ended up missing most of the rest of the season, not returning until April. In 2022, Dybala left Juve to join Roma on a free transfer, where he has avoided too many long-term setbacks, but has suffered so many niggling muscle injuries that it has made it practically impossible for him to gather momentum or fulfill his potential. Now aged 31, injuries have taken a toll on Dybala's pace and explosivity, but he remains a joy to watch in full flow, and there are still few better players than him in Serie A when he is at his best. The fact of the matter is that he has only won 40 caps and scored a bitterly disappointing 4 goals for Argentina though, when, without endless injuries, I suspect we'd be talking about someone who had been Argentina's second best player over the last 10 years, and had at least 2 or 3 top 10 finishes in Ballon d'Or voting. 6th, Wesley Fofana. Whereas most people probably agree that Paulo Dybala was a generational talent ravaged by injuries, I suspect that my inclusion in 6th place may prove to be that little bit more divisive. The youngest player in this 7, at 24, it is just worth noting that Wesley Fofana could well still become a world-class centre-back. My only argument is that he already would be one were it not for injuries, which he most assuredly isn't right now. A graduate of the Saint Etienne youth ranks, Fofana was snapped up by Leicester City for a staggering £36.5 million after making just 20 league appearances in the Saint Etienne first team. It was a reflection of the immensely high regard that Fofana was already held in by scouts, data analysts, and various recruitment departments, and he quickly illustrated why that was the case. In his debut campaign at the King Power Stadium, which started when he was only 19, it is worth noting, Fofana was just ridiculously good. So good, in fact, that I'd say I could count on one hand the number of centre-backs that I have seen over the last 15 to 20 years who have looked that complete and that comfortable playing at the highest level at that tender age, or who I have felt more confident were destined to play and achieve great things at the highest level. There was an element of Virgil van Dijk about Fofana, insofar as everything just seems so easy and natural for him. This at an age where Van Dijk himself was still trying to break into the first team, at Groningen in the Netherlands. Leicester finished 5th and won the FA Cup in Fofana's debut campaign, as he won the club's Young Player of the Season award, but during a pre-season friendly ahead of the start of his second season, Fofana suffered a nasty leg break while playing against Villarreal. He missed almost all of the following season as a result, as Leicester fell to 8th, but in spite of the fact that he had barely played any football for 12 months, and was just coming back from a broken leg, Fofana's stock remained so high that Chelsea forked out a potential £75 million to sign him. A month later, Fofana scored his first Champions League goal against AC Milan, but after 38 minutes of that very same game, he was forced off with a serious knee injury. Successive knee injuries sidelined Fofana for most of his debut campaign at Chelsea, and during pre-season ahead of his second, Chelsea announced the devastating news that he had ruptured his ACL. That meant that Fofana didn't play a single minute of football last season, and also that he had played barely 30 games of football in all competitions over the course of more than 3 years. Coming back from an ACL injury alone is tough enough.
Am I tough enough? Tough enough? Hell yes, I'm tough enough.
Let alone combined with a leg break and barely having kicked a ball since the age of 20. Fofana returned to first-team action under Enzo Maresca this season, making 12 appearances before, in January, he was forced off with a hamstring injury, which might even have ended his season, meaning that he will have played less than 50 games of football and spent the vast majority of the last 4 years on the sidelines with serious injuries. It is just horrendously bad luck, and it is difficult to see how Fofana can both physically and mentally recover and get back to the levels that he looked capable of reaching in his first season in Leicestershire. I sincerely hope that he can, as should all football fans, but for now, I think that he would be one of, if not the best centre-backs in the world right now without injuries. He is nowhere near that, because of injuries, and therefore he has to feature. Fifth, Samuel Umtiti. Sticking on the theme of French centre-backs, I don't feel as though Samuel Umtiti quite gets spoken about enough. A teenage sensation at Lyon, Umtiti became a starman for Barcelona at just 22, and he lifted the World Cup as one of the best players at the tournament at the age of 24. None of that is normal. A magnificent all-round left-footed centre-back, Umtiti was big, powerful, tremendous in the air, he could eat up ground and keep pace with almost anyone, his timing and anticipation were excellent, and his distribution very rarely let him down. At the 2018 World Cup, Umtiti's centre-back partnership with Raphael Varane was as important as Paul Pogba, Antoine Griezmann or Kylian Mbappe to France's success, and of the two of them, it was arguably Umtiti in Russia, rather than Varane, who was the star man. France only scored 3 goals in 3 games during the group stage, but still managed to top their group thanks to their excellent defensive record, and in their toughest game of the tournament, against Belgium in the semi-finals, Umtiti not only played a key role in Les Bleus keeping a hard-fought clean sheet, he also scored the only goal of the game at the other end, firing Didier Deschamps' side into a World Cup final. What a lot of people didn't know at the time was that Umtiti had been beset by muscle and knee injuries throughout the 2017-18 season, having played an immense amount of football for his age, and he had been advised by several physios and doctors to miss the World Cup in Russia, undergo surgery on his knee, and get some much-needed rest. Umtiti refused, effectively sacrificing himself and playing through the pain in order to get France over the line in Russia. But boy has he paid a big price for it. Avoiding surgery in the summer of 2018 saw Umtiti sidelined with his knee injuries for Barcelona for most of the 2018-19 season, in which he played in just 15 of the club's more than 50 games, and the next season wouldn't represent much of an improvement. In addition to his chronic knee injury, which he hadn't fixed, Umtiti injured his foot, only featuring 18 times at the Camp Nou in all competitions. In fact, post-2018 World Cup, Umtiti failed to make more than 14 La Liga appearances, or 18 appearances in all competitions, in any of his next 4 seasons at Barcelona. He played 25 times on loan at Lecce in the 2022-23 season, but the fact that he was playing for Lecce at all, with all due respect, in a Serie A relegation battle, at the age of 28 when he ought to have been hitting his peak, was a reflection of how far injuries had set Umtiti back. When the 2022 World Cup came around, though Umtiti was still in his 20s, he hadn't played for France in over 3 years. Still aged only 31 now, Umtiti is currently contracted to Lille, but following yet another knee injury, he finally went under the knife almost exactly a year ago to the day, and he still hasn't returned. As a result, Umtiti has only made 13 appearances in over 18 months since signing for Lille, and fewer than 100 appearances in all competitions in almost 7 years since the 2018 World Cup. Umtiti will always be a World Cup winner, no one can take that from him, but it is difficult not to wonder what might have been had he taken doctor's advice that summer. Fourth, Luke Shaw. This feels like an obvious inclusion, but that doesn't make it any less true. Luke Shaw enjoyed a sensational breakout campaign at Southampton in their first season back in the Premier League, then aged only 17. The previous season, while Southampton was still in the Championship, a 16-year-old Shaw yet to make his first team debut had attracted interest from the likes of Chelsea, Manchester City and Arsenal, with the Saints managing to rebuff them with a £4 million asking price. That would very quickly come to look like an absolute bargain, as Shaw backed up his brilliant debut campaign in the Premier League with an even better second one, playing 38 games while still in his teens as a star man in a Southampton team that finished 8th in the Premier League table. Shaw's stock went through the roof as he broke into the England team, was nominated for the PFA Young Player of the Year award, and made the PFA Team of the Year at left back. Manchester United swooped in a year after Sir Alex Ferguson retired, paying what was then a world record fee for a teenager of £30 million for Shaw. It is tough to believe that was over 10 years ago, but it was, I've done the maths, so you'll just have to take my word for it. Shaw suffered a hamstring injury before the start of the season, which wasn't too serious in isolation, but it was just the beginning of a series of setbacks. A hamstring injury and a blow to the face followed, causing Shaw to play just 16 Premier League games in his debut campaign at Old Trafford. Nonetheless, he bounced back and began the 2015-16 season like a house on fire, which made it all the more painful, physically and psychologically, when he suffered a double leg fracture after a tackle by PSV's Hector Moreno in only the second month of the campaign. That sidelined Shaw for the rest of the season, and though he returned and became, in spells, one of the best fullbacks in the world for Manchester United and England, rarely has he been able to enjoy sustained periods of fitness. That has been particularly true of the last 18 or 19 months, in which Shaw, who is currently injured, has suffered knee, calf, thigh, and an assortment of other muscle injuries, restricting him to just 15 Premier League appearances during that time. Now aged 29, Shaw has made barely 250 Career League appearances, and he has won just 34 caps, despite being England's first-choice left-back for most of the last 11 years. Without injuries, Shaw most likely would have been one of, if not the best left-back of his age cohort, and while he has still been that every now and then, he mostly hasn't been because of them, and, therefore, I hope you'll agree, he is perfectly suited for this seven. Third, Corentin Tolisso. There is maybe a lack of appreciation outside of France and Bavaria as to just how talented Corentin Tolisso was, and to some degree still is, and just how frighteningly good he could have been had he not spent quite so long on the treatment table. A regular for Lyon at 19, Tolisso was gifted, hard-working, and possessed a first-class football brain from a relatively early age. He was also a fantastic athlete, capable of running from box to box all game, which is perhaps why injuries hit him so hard. Part of the France team that won the 2018 World Cup, Tolisso joined Bayern Munich for a potential fee of almost 15 million euros the previous summer, breaking both Bayern and the Bundesliga's record fee at the time. That was a reflection of the high regard that Tolisso was held in, but in his second season in Bavaria, the Frenchman tore his cruciate ligaments, ruling him out for the rest of the season. He returned the following season, but repeated muscle injuries, his loss of athleticism, and the partnership that Joshua Kimmich, Leon Goretzka, and Thiago Alcantara had developed by this time made it hard for Tolisso to break back into the first team, even when he was fit. He suffered another serious setback in the 2020-21 season, namely a ruptured tendon, and during the last 4 years of his 5-year contract at Bayern, Tolisso failed to make more than 16 Bundesliga appearances in any of them, including substitute appearances. I honestly think, based upon his last season at Lyon and his first at Bayern, that were it not for injuries, Tolisso would still be a star man for club and country now, aged only 30. Instead, he rejoined Lyon on a free transfer in 2022, where he has since made 92 appearances and is still one of their best players, but not one of the world's best, which was where he looked to be heading, before tearing his cruciate in 2018. Second, Reece James. An uncontroversial inclusion, I would imagine, since I get the sense that even fans of Chelsea's rivals recognise Reece James's enormous talent and what an equally enormous shame it has been that he seemingly cannot stay fit for more than a couple of weeks at a time. There is, of course, an undercurrent of sadness which runs through this entire seven at what might have been, but I suppose that is especially acute for Chelsea fans, given that it features two of what would be their strongest back four without injuries. Reece James is someone who was recognised as an extraordinary talent from a very early age. He joined Chelsea at the age of 6 and, at the age of 17, he captained the club to glory in the FA Youth Cup and won Chelsea's Academy Player of the Season award, following in the footsteps of Dominic Solanke, Fikayo Toure and Mason Mount. In fact, and this is a slight tangent, but if you look at the recipients of Chelsea's Academy Player of the Year award, and this isn't the case at most clubs, not even close, they have almost all played Premier League and international football, with the exception of Harvey Vale. Back on topic, next up for James was a low move to Wigan Athletic at 18 to prove that he could compete in men's football, and boy did he do just that. Sensational in a struggling Wigan Athletic team, James made 46 appearances and picked up a clean sweep of awards, Player of the Year, Players' Player of the Year, and even Goal of the Season from right back at the club's end-of-season ceremony. James only missed one league game for Wigan all season, but, unfortunately, the same has not been true, or even remotely close to being true, of any of his seasons back at Chelsea. In fact, somewhat extraordinarily, now aged 25, almost a third of James's total career league starts still came during his single season on loan at Wigan in the Championship 6 years ago. That pretty much sums it up. The Englishman still played plenty of football in his first 3 seasons back at Stamford Bridge, earning himself a reputation as one of the best fullbacks on the planet at a very early age, breaking into the England team, and playing a key role in Chelsea's 2020-21 Champions League title, where he pocketed an, at that time, absolutely flying Raheem Sterling on Manchester City's left flank in the final. Ankle injuries were the first to bite James, starting in 2019, but it was the recurring muscle injuries, and especially tearing and straining his hamstring, that has proved to be the most damaging. In December 2023, James finally went under the knife in an effort to end his chronic hamstring problems, ruling him out for the rest of the 2023-24 season. Unfortunately, that doesn't appear to have done the trick, as he has been limited to just 9 appearances in all competitions this season, playing barely 500 minutes of football, thanks largely to 2 long-term hamstring injuries. A fast, powerful, and explosive fullback or wingback, whose athleticism is, or was at least, so integral to his game, James initially played as a centre-forward in youth team football, where he sought to emulate the style of Chelsea legend Didier Drogba. One theory is that James's pace and dynamism made him predisposed to picking up muscle injuries, a common problem among very quick players, although it is difficult to dismiss the role of sheer bad luck. Whatever the cause, the fact of the matter is that we haven't seen the best of Reece James, certainly not for any sustained period of time, for over 3 years, and he's only 25 years old now. Whether he is even capable of returning to his former heights or fulfilling his true potential following so many muscle injuries is a sad but legitimate question one must ask, along with whether he will ever be able to stay fit long enough for us to even find out. Given that James was already one of the best right-backs in Europe at 20, I think that it is safe to assume that without a myriad of injury problems, which have limited him to just 20 appearances in the last 2 years, he would comfortably be among the best at 25, if not the very best of them all. First, Ansu Fati. A bit like Wesley Fofana, Ansu Fati is one of those rare teenage prospects who, the more that I watched them, the more that I felt as though they were a surefire thing. Maybe I am just doubling down on that misapprehension, rather than conceding the possibility that I might have been wrong all along, but in both instances, I honestly think that were it not for injuries, they would be among the best players on the planet. Fati was like Lamine Yamal before Lamine Yamal, and while I think that, in a head-to-head comparison of the two at 17, Yamal is even better than Fati was, not being quite as good as one of the greatest teenage footballers of the modern era, if not of all time, isn't an enormous critique. Born in Guinea-Bissau, Fati's family emigrated to Spain when he was 5 years old, making enormous sacrifices so that he could join the Sevilla Academy. At the age of 10, Fati's talents had been recognised by Barcelona, who brought the child to Catalonia. The talk of La Masia for a number of years, when Fati made his senior Barcelona debut at the age of 16, he became the club's 2nd youngest player of all time, and their youngest since 1941. Less than a week later, Fati had scored his first goal for Barcelona in only his 2nd appearance, becoming their youngest ever goal scorer, and the 3rd youngest in the entire history of La Liga. He ended his debut campaign, having turned 17 by then, with 7 goals and 8 goal contributions from only 11 starts, and in August 2020, he was rewarded with his senior Spanish debut, and 3 days later, sure enough, he also became Spain's youngest ever goal scorer. At this point, Fati was earning Messi comparisons, but in truth, the two were radically different in terms of style. As with the likes of Dybala, James, and even Umtiti, one of Fati's greatest strengths, his deceptively powerful 5'10" frame, his athleticism, and his robust style, may also have been among his greatest weaknesses. In fairness, the poor fortune for Fati didn't start with minor but recurring muscle injuries, as with so many other players in this list, but rather a nasty meniscus tear to his left knee. That ruled Fati out for over 10 months, aged 20 at the time, and, in truth, he has never fully recovered. It was shortly after his long-anticipated return the following season that muscle injuries, and especially hamstring injuries, started to become a more frequent occurrence, stripping Fati of a lot of his dynamism and acceleration and, perhaps just as importantly, a lot of his self-confidence and belief. Both physically and mentally, the combination of recurring muscle injuries and ongoing issues with his knee hampered Fati's ability to take players on, beat them, and get in amongst it, which were his greatest strengths when he first broke through as a wonder kid. Barcelona allowed Fati to go out on loan to Brighton last season in the hope that he would find regular game time and rediscover his confidence, but instead, he suffered another fairly serious calf injury and only made 19 Premier League appearances, failing to make too many memorable contributions. Since returning to Catalonia, Fati has suffered 2 more injuries, limiting him to just 4 appearances, totaling 125 minutes of football in La Liga this season. The sad fact remains that Fati's breakout campaign at 16 and 17 is probably still his best, and he hasn't won a cap for Spain since October 2023. Were it not for injuries, I think that Fati would have been one of the stars, alongside Lamine Yamal, of Spain's victorious Euro 2024 squad. I think that he would still be a mainstay in Barcelona's front line, and, quite possibly, one of the best players in the world. Still aged only 22, Fati has time on his side, but, so far at least, not much fortune. And if he can bounce back from the sheer number of injuries that he has had, the amount of football that he has missed, and the knock to his confidence that has obviously caused to reach his full potential, it will be one of football's greatest ever comebacks. Here's hoping that is the case for not just Fati but every player in this 7, or at least that they can find fitness and play regular football again, at whatever level or standard it might be at. I should point out that the likes of Thiago Alcantara, Eden Hazard, and even Gareth Bale perhaps would still be world-class now were it not for injuries, but having all retired, they are no longer active or current footballers, and therefore weren't eligible. Marco Reus is still playing, but while he would still be excellent, I think that it is debatable as to whether he would still definitively be world-class at the age of 35, and I left out Ousmane Dembele because I think that, while he would be even better, and would have been a lot better for a lot longer without injuries, I think that you could legitimately call him world-class right now. This season, Dembele has scored 23 goals and made 6 assists, to give him a combined total of 29 goal contributions in only 28 games for PSG, making him, by any metric, one of the best forwards in the world. More importantly, he hasn't had any injuries aside from a brief illness this season, and long may that continue. The absence of injuries, that is, not the illness, of course. That would be an unusual and quite an unpleasant thing to wish upon someone. Oh, and I also left out Neymar because maybe he will still be world-class at Santos, it remains to be seen, and even if he isn't, he obviously was world-class for a decade plus, so it hardly seemed in keeping with the spirit of the video to include him. Honourable mentions go to Mario Götze, who is still only 32, if you can believe it. Again, you should. I wouldn't lie about something like that. Jose Haya, who I legitimately think was one of the best left-backs in the world before his muscle injuries became quite so frequent, and Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, who I think was perfect for Klopp's system at Liverpool and was performing brilliantly, you may recall, before doing the ligaments in his knee. He is still only 31. I also think Callum Hudson-Odoi was capable of becoming something quite extraordinary without injuries, but he is only 24 and is performing very well at Nottingham Forest right now, so who knows? Maybe he can undergo a Dembelean transition and still become world-class. Anyway, that is it for today's video. Thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. I hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts or suggestions as to players who you believe could have featured or should have featured down below in the comments. And of course, it goes without saying, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can also find me on various social media platforms and in the real world, if you're especially committed to that sort of thing. Please don't. Via the video description below. Cheers, and have perhaps the best day of your life today. You know, why not shoot for the stars?